Hello guys and welcome to my new video. I just had my birthday and it's time to make videos, and today we're going to be looking at the god comp that is fully emerging in that season 4 Mythic Plus meta. Honestly, there has been that huge snowball effect that if you watch my previous videos about healers, you're probably fully aware about the reasons and why it's happening, but let's go and have a look. Keep in mind, in this video we're going to be looking at the most popular specs and classes when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus content in terms of tanks, DPS and healers. If you're not doing or want to do high-end Mythic Plus content, I urge you to play the spec of the class that you enjoy the most, because that is the best value for your subscription. But if you're someone who's going to look to push for that rank 1 title, especially if you're trying to do it solo, these specs and classes are going to give you the best chance of getting invited, because I can already see the snowball effect in its full force. And full disclosure, I have not started pushing Mythic Plus yet, because I don't really push at the start of the season. I wait for good affixes, I wait until my characters are fully geared, and then I start to push towards that rank 1 title. But even now, I've started to see the disparity in terms of which classes get invited, because there's a lot of competition even in these weekly keys. And what you see right now is the god comp that is emerging as very strong in Mythic Plus content. We're going to start off with, again, we also have the subsection, which classes that could also fit in there, but we'll talk about that at the end of the video. So first of all, we're going to talk about Vengeance Demon Hunter, and Vengeance Demon Hunter actually received a nerf in terms of sigils, and it hasn't really changed anything. Vengeance is still looking to be like the only tank for really high-end Mythic Plus pushing, and that is because of the amount of CC that it can provide. And the best example that I can give you is that I've done a bunch of keys with Vengeance, and I've done a bunch of keys with other tanks. For example, there was a Blood Decay who was asking me, should I play a Blood Decay or Vengeance Demon Hunter in Season 4 in terms of Mythic Plus or high-end Mythic Plus. You could play Blood Decay, but then, let's say you're in a Discord group, you will have to assign interrupts, CC, knockups, stones and all of that for big trash pack pulls. You'll have to have the rest of your group really pay attention in terms of when to CC, when to interrupt, or you could just play a Vengeance Demon Hunter and handle most of that yourself. And this is especially true if you don't have a Discord, if you're running with a pug group, if you don't want to be fully reliant on the rest of your group. Vengeance can provide you with a lot of that self-control. Again, sigils have been nerfed, and I'm not sure how Blizzard can balance Vengeance without actually fully removing sigils or something along those lines, because even with the nerfs, Vengeance is still looking to climb and be an insanely powerful tank, and I think most of the tanking community out there are not happy about this. They want better balance. And on top of that, you also provide Chaos Brand, which is a magic debuff that is great in the current comp that is revolving around caster DPS. And now we move on to Shadow Priest, which honestly has been strong throughout the Dragonflight. There has been a couple of hiccups, but Shadow Priest is doing really well. The damage that it provides, you do have power of fortitude in terms of survivability for the rest of your group. You also have Master Spell, which honestly, again, it is 2 minutes. I'm fully aware the Master Spell is 2 minutes, but it's better than nothing, especially when it comes to certain dungeons like, let's say, the last boss in Ultima. There is a couple of dungeons out there where Master Spell can still play a pretty nice role. And on top of that, you also have PI or Power Infusion, which can be shared among your other DPS specs in your group and can actually really prop them up. Shadow Priest is looking like a pure lock-in, and it's one of the reasons why Holy Priest and Discipline Priest has fallen significantly in Season 4 and even in Season 3. Now let's go to Augmentation Evoker, and I don't think Augmentation Evoker is all that great if you're not looking to do really high Mythic Plus keys. I generally believe that having 3 pure DPS classes in your 5-man composition is better for the overall DPS, but soon, if you're going to climb and push higher keys, you will approach a point where survivability is going to be the biggest obstacle in terms of timing the key. Don't get me wrong, you still want to pump damage, you still need to meet the DPS checks or DPS requirements, but survivability might be the biggest thing, and Augmentation Evoker is still looking to be a very strong component of that group. On top of that, again, Augmentation or Evokers in general getting a legendary, that's going to be a big boon to the spec or to the class itself. You also have the spell anything button in terms of Cauterizing Flame, which again, bleed these spells, especially in something like the third boss in Ultima, can be really nice. So Augmentation, and I kind of have to mention here, I could have easily included Devastation in the subsection, because for example, if you're playing Augmentation Evoker, you're doing something like Brackenhide Hollow, and you're like, we're going to have to deal or meet the DPS checks when we're dealing with the totems. And you're like, okay, I don't really want to play Augmentation Evoker for this part. I'm going to swap out and start playing something like a Devastation Evoker for the rest of the dungeon. And Devastation has arguably one of the best burst DPS and also is kind of pumping. So your Augmentation Evoker can swap to Devastation if they need to. I don't think you'll have to do this for every single key, every single affix and things like that. You just have the option of swapping to another really strong pure DPS class. And this is why I'm going to put Devastation in the subsection, because your augmentation has multiple different possibilities. And the most interesting spec in this god comp is going to be Mage, because I've included Fire Mage and Frost Mage here because both of these specs are actually getting a pretty good distribution in terms of pushing the highest keys or the highest Mythic Plus dungeons in the world. But I'm not going to be talking about the difference between them. I'm just going to highlight the fact that Mage is almost always going to be a pretty meta spec when it comes to Mythic Plus content, as long as the Mage or any of the Mage specs can provide decent damage, if they have a bunch of defensive buttons that they can press, and a good Mage can have a lot of defensive buttons if they use it properly. And as long as Mage provides that intellect buff, especially in a caster focused composition, Mage, it's going to be hard to knock Mage out of that meta spot because of the utility or what it provides in the group. And now let's go to your healer, and that's going to be Restoration Druid. Now the snowball effect that happened to Resto Druid, if you watch my previous videos, my predictions for Mythic Plus, you know why, but Resto Druid has become the one and only healer when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus, pushing almost to the same extent as Vengeance Demon Hunter is the only one tank for high-end Mythic Plus pushing. And it is relatively sad to see, because even in Season 3 you had a bit of a better balance, but right now there are multiple reasons why Resto Druid is the preferred option. First of all, Resto Druid is the best Druid spec out there right now. Balance Druid has fallen off, Feral is not really all that popular, Guardian Druid is, again, Guardian Druid can't compare with Vengeance. So now in order to provide Mark of the Wild, Restoration Druid is your best option. On top of that, meeting a lot of the healing checks out there is Resto Druid when it comes to high-end, especially tyrannical keys. In terms of working with your tier set, your Grove Guardians, the fact that you can spec into Tree of Life in order to provide additional healing if the damage pattern is fitted. Again, the perfect example might be something like Causing Infusion, third boss, where there's a huge amount of raw damage coming out, and Resto Druid can provide 500-600k HPS for the duration of 4 or 5 minutes relatively easily, while other healers might struggle a little bit more. Now, Druid is kind of made for that fight because of the type of damage that's happening, but it's an example of why Resto Druid is being preferred. They can meet healing checks, they have multiple different kind of talent options that they can spec into in order to provide more damage or more healing. The priority DPS is still relatively strong, and on top of that, the biggest thing, Mark of the Wild. Now, there has been buffs to Balance Druid tier set, and a lot of people were memeing about this because the Balance Druid tier set buffs are almost like more of a buffs to Restoration Druid because of the swapping that is happening in high-end Mythic Plus keys. If you're looking at Reddit.io information, you're like, why is there no healers for these keys? Are the groups really doing these plus 19 dungeons without a healer? That's not really true. A lot of the times the Resto Druid will swap to Balance Druid and do a portion of that dungeon as a balance until they meet their first healing check. Then they'll run out of dungeon, swap to Resto Druid, but Raider.io information will not pick that up. So no, healers are still needed, but for a lot of these dungeons where healing requirements are very, very different, a perfect example is AV, Azure Vault, or Brackenhide Hollow. A lot of the times the healing checks there are not really comparable to something like Uldaman or something like Causing Infusion. And this is where you start seeing this kind of swapping happening, and it's nothing new. It happened in Season 3 and it's going to happen in Season 4. Let's look at the subs in terms of specs and classes that can come into the God comp and do really well, and Destruction Warlock is definitely up there. If you can pull around Destruction Warlock cooldowns, the ramping AoE damage on large AoE trash packs is honestly going to be very, very hard to beat. So I think Destruction Warlock is a relatively popular pick, and it could come into the God comp. Let's say, for example, you get your Destruction Warlock instead of a Mage, and that could be a possible substitution, but you might be missing Arcane Intellect if you don't have a Mage and things like that. So there's a couple of things that you have to sacrifice. So overall, Destruction might not be the absolute meta pick, but it's right in there, depending on how you pull around its cooldowns. The main reason I included Devastation Evoker here is because your augmentation can swap to Devastation. In really high keys, I still feel augmentation is going to be the best Evoker spec, but when it comes to certain dungeons, I think Devastation can actually be a pretty solid choice. I don't think it really deserves this spot right here, but I'm gonna keep it because it is a viable option for your augmentation. And in terms of melee DPS, I can definitely include Retribution Paladin right here. Sadly, it's actually the only one melee spec that has seen any decent representation in really high Mythic Plus keys, which is honestly extremely disheartening if you're a melee DPS out there. Retribution actually still has a decent amount of players playing, pushing keys and things like that, but outside of that, in terms of melee, you're not going to see anything else. And this kind of completes my God comp that a lot of players are pushing right now in terms of high-end Mythic Plus keys and certain other specs that could come in and provide a certain amount of value when played correctly. Guys, let me know how you feel about this balance. Let's look at real player information. This is week 3 in terms of Dragonflight. I don't think this is going to change all that much. I think the snowball effect is actually going to continue. And this is why I'm making this video, because I really hope Blizzard could actually do some further changes, but I'm not sure. So in terms of tanks, Vengeance Demon Hunter, let's be honest, it's the only one tank that a lot of people are going to bring in really high-end Mythic Plus keys, and that's because of the control, because of the sigil. I don't know how Blizzard can balance Vengeance without actually decimating sigils, and I'm not sure if they really want to do that. So right now, Vengeance is going to give you the best chance of getting invited if you're trying to poke keys or if you're trying to get that rank 1. The same kind of thing is happening to Restoration Druid, and I don't think Resto Druid is miles ahead of everyone else. I think the fact that Resto Druid is the best of Druid specs when it comes to Mythic Plus content in terms of providing Mark of the Wild has really torpedoed them as being, again, the one and only healer when it comes to really high-end Mythic Plus keys. In Season 3, we saw Mistweaver Monks being almost overtaking Resto Druids in terms of popularity. Their healing was nerfed. And on top of that, you could kind of squeeze in Balanced Druid a lot easier in that composition when it comes to Season 3. And that has kind of changed, and now Mistweavers have fallen, and now Resto Druid has risen. Preservation Evoker was really disappointing in terms of the numbers that I'm seeing right now, but this is something that I predicted. I really enjoyed the modified version of Season 1 that's coming back, or came back in Season 4 in terms of tier sets. I like the gameplay. I think the damage and healing output of Preservation Evoker is actually really good. But people have not abandoned their other healers to swap the Preservation, and that's partly due to the fact that range limitations, and I'm playing my Preservation, the range limitations can still be really annoying. And on top of that, in terms of Evokers, you have to compete with Augmentation and also Devastation. There's a lot of issues that are happening to Preservation Evoker, even though their actual numbers are really good, and I was kind of hoping there would be more people jumping on the Preservation Evoker bandwagon, but honestly, I think this spec is suffering a lot from the range restrictions, and I hope that Blizzard is going to do something about it in the War Within. In terms of other healers, you can see Priest. They're suffering from the fact that Shadow Priest is arguably the strongest DPS spec when it comes to high-end Mythic Plus pushing. So people don't want to, again, overlap utilities, and this is why Priest is actually fallen. Holy Paladin could have used a lot more gameplay improvements, and I think Resto Shaman has actually kind of climbed a little bit. I'm playing my Resto Shaman right now, and I'm having really a lot of fun, but overall healer balance is becoming really atrocious when it's coming to really high-end Mythic Plus pushing, because Resto Druid is getting away with it, and in the next couple of weeks I'm actually thinking this is going to get even more egregiously stupid in terms of Resto Druid domination. In terms of melee DPS, you can see Retribution is kind of holding its own, but honestly the caster meta is really emerging in Season 4. Shadow Priest, again, arguably the best DPS in terms of looking at the whole package that it provides. We're looking at Augmentation being used in really high-end keys, in weekly keys or lower keys. I don't like Augmentation. I'd rather play the 3 DPS spec because it's more overall damage, but Augmentation provides that survivability in high keys that is going to be mandatory or almost mandatory. In terms of other specs, you can see mages are doing really well. Again, multiple specs are doing well. We're talking about the fact that as long as the mage provides that intellect buff, has strong defensives, and provides, again, as long as it has decent damage, it's very hard for a mage not to be included in that Mythic Plus composition for high-end pushing, because again, of multiple things it provides. Destruction Warlocks, this kind of finishes here. In terms of other specs, there's very little representation. You can see these specs are dominating. You can see tanks are just atrociously badly balanced right now, with Vengeance being the only one tank, and Resto Druid is probably going to follow suit. So the summary of the video, the God comp is fully back, and if you're someone who's looking to pug keys, especially high-end Mythic Plus keys, and you're not playing these meta specs, you're probably going to not get invited for hours or have to push your own keys. I'm not saying you cannot push the highest keys in the world as an off-meta spec. You can absolutely do that. I've seen multiple different comps that are not playing the best healers, are not playing the best DPS or the best tanks, and they can still do really well. But that requires a lot of effort, and you need to have an organized group who will invite you. Most of the people out there who are pushing rank 1 title keys, they want the easiest, or they choose the path of least resistance, and that means picking what's most popular, picking what's going to give you statistically the best chance of success. But keep in mind, this is for really high keys. If you're not looking to push that rank 1 title, again, I said this multiple times throughout the video, play the class spec or role that you enjoy the most, because You are paying money for this game and you want to enjoy your time. So guys, let me know how you feel about this video. Let me know if you think Blizzard is going to include more balancing changes, because right now these specs, this god comp is looking to run away with it in season 4. High-end Mythiclus pushers are probably going to be using something along the lines of the comp that I showed you. Let me know how you feel about this, and I'll see you in my next video.